I mean, what would you make in the space now of this? Right. So there's, I'm always careful to say that this is generally what's happening online, because I think the internet is like a series of echo chambers. So I
Yeah,
think it's like you see one echo chamber and you see how they react. But there is certainly that sort of, what would you call it? The ancestral echo chamber almost of, just natural living, just sun, salt water, and great. To be fair, good advice in many respects. But when taken to the nth degree, it's like, let's say just like putting, I would say, like a friend of mine, when I was getting on Roaccutane, he was telling me, "Oh, just use beef tallow for your face or your skin." I'm like, bro, I don't think beef tallow is going to be as effective
yeah.
as this. But this is just kind of some of the advice that would be spouted. Do you feel like, do you feel almost sometimes a little bit of like general negativity almost towards doctors? Because I've maybe noticed this on some accounts online, and I'm like, what is going on here?
Yes, and your point about the echo chambers and the internet being not a general thing but a series of echo chambers is excellent. And I would just take it to one further level, which is that they're like individual echo chambers, but they're more like kind of Venn diagrams where there's a little bit of an intersection between these different echo chambers. And this is what makes it really difficult for people to navigate because, for example, you might be, let's say, an outdoors person that's really into nutrition, and maybe you're kind of into the environment and you don't like the urban world, and all those things are kind of within your chamber, let's say. But then you come across this ancestral living, and there might be about 50% of the things that you actually agree with, like we should get outdoors more, we should be active, we shouldn't, I don't know, just eat crap diets. But then it's like these things that are kind of just shoved in with that, which is, oh, so don't vaccinate your children, so don't take any medications if you're sick. And it's like, whoa, I was with you until that part. And this is the difficult thing for people, and that's how they kind of get sucked in, is because you were in the intersection of the Venn diagram and then you got dragged into the center of the echo chamber. And that's what can be really difficult for people. And I would agree with you that there is that general, I think, sentiment of being anti-medicine that has probably proliferated even more in the kind of post-COVID era. Um, Partially, I would say, for good reason, because I like to play, devil's advocate and understand where people are coming from. And I think that, there was issues with maybe communication about why certain pandemic responses were occurring, and there was certain overreach in some areas. I'm with people on that. But what I don't agree with is that, okay, therefore, like, government mistakes, therefore the whole institution of medicine is bad, and therefore the whole practice of vaccination is bad. Like, that for me is just total overcorrection, and it's part of this kind of soundbite culture where you have to take your whole worldview and just bring it down to a sentence or a couple of sentences and stick with that as a rigid ideology. I think that's a very poor way to live in a complex world, and you just can't live like that.
Very interesting. Yeah. And I would completely echo that sentiment where, there, I suppose I've no medical background, nothing like that. Just disclaimer for me making this point, but it's like, I suppose there, just from, I do have somewhat of a knowledge in like calculating risk and that kind of thing, just from like previous like things I used to do before my career path now. But the correct thing to do in a case like that, right? So you think like this crisis is going on, happens very quickly. The correct thing to do is to overreact. And like that sounds like an oxymoron, because how can you correctly overreact? But it's like there's this long tail of it. There's an exponential factor to it, and like this non-linearity.
Yeah.
So like that's like in defense of, like, I would have gripes as well, but like in defense of, let's say, government authorities, I'm like, when you don't know what's going on in something that is non-linear, you want to overreact. Somewhat. And with, I'm interested there where you said you would have had some issues, in those times, or just with, not necessarily just in those times, but let's say just with, let's say, certain things in the medical profession. You come at it from an interesting perspective because you're also a physiotherapist and you have 10 years of coaching. Do you think that helps you a lot as a doctor, where you can kind of come at things from a different perspective? Like, you're going to, maybe would it make you more of like a general health prescriptive kind of individual, if that kind of makes sense? Or do you think that background will be something kind of very beneficial that maybe some doctors could potentially be missing out on?
I would say so. And what I would say more so, to give doctors some credit in this sense, is that with me having that kind of decade of experience, specifically with behavior change, there's an element, there's skill set and knowledge there together that would enable me to be able to help someone to change their diet, or to maybe to get exercising, and to tell them specifically what that looks like, that most doctors generally aren't going to have, because of the amount of other things they have to learn. Like the intensity of medical school, like it can't be overstated. It is really difficult, and so is postgraduate training thereafter. And doctors are incredibly busy especially in modern hospitals, where there's so many bureaucratic steps that they have to take for everything to happen. All those things make it very understandable that a doctor isn't going home at night for their one free hour and reading, evidence-based exercise information. So I understand why individual doctors maybe end up with poor exercise prescription skills or poor nutrition prescription skills. But to your point, I do think that my experience will definitely aid me in that quite a bit, hopefully.
And would you say there are any ways that we could almost reinstate that trust a bit more nearly as a society? I don't think in Ireland we have it as much as, let's say, the US, for example, right? But we're very much a don't rock the boat kind of society, I would say. In terms of, I don't think the onus is necessarily on doctors, because I think there were things that were just far outside of their control in that whole time period, which is a time period that eroded trust, particularly in the US and kind of the UK. The UK seems to be a bit more kind of not as much, less rock the boat than we are. Would you see, like, I guess, who would the onus be on to try and reinstate that trust? And are there any ways that we could kind of do that as a society? Because we kind of need doctors, man. And there's a lot of stuff about the human body that we just fucking don't know. Like, well, at least someone like me didn't fucking know. Like, you need doctors and that kind of thing to be trusted and venerated in a society for it to work very well.
100%. And I think that, medicine is an incredibly important profession and institution. And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that until they're sick. And that's the experience I've had with trainers myself, who were maybe previously quite anti-medicine, and then they get an illness themselves, and they realize, oh, these medicines, they actually work, and I actually improved, and this is fantastic. Because it's very easy to delude yourself when you're healthy into thinking that, oh, if everyone just lived like me, they'd be healthy too. But then, you end up with something that's beyond your control, like some form of cancer, or you end up with, inflammatory bowel disease, or whatever it happens to be. And then you require a significant medical and or surgical intervention. So obviously you can't just get everyone to the point where they have a severe disease to reinstate trust. So I think, to be honest with you, I think that a lot of anti-medicine sentiment doesn't exist in isolation. It exists as part of broader anti-institutional sentiment, where there's a distrust of all institutions as opposed to just medicine. Like a lot, especially if you look at the kind of ancestral kind of health side of the fitness industry, which often overlaps with libertarianism and to some degree conservatism, but really the more libertarian people, what you typically see there is that they don't just distrust medicine, they also distrust, teachers and all politicians and police and basically every kind of public institution. And, again, part of that is understandable, to be fair, but I don't know how you fully reinstate that trust as such, because I think the problem to date, and I'll just focus on health because that's what I know more about, is that what we often tend to do is double down when people distrust. So, for example, telling people that they're stupid because they were worried about their child getting vaccinated. And of course, I'm not saying doctors individually do that, but there's often that sentiment, that anti-vaxxers are inherently stupid and not addressing concerns appropriately. That does happen. So yeah, I think dialogue is often a good way to approach conflict resolution, treating people with respect. If people, let's say, are against masks, not to just tell them they're killing their granny, but rather to maybe try to have a more coherent conversation. But I also understand that sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes people are just very ideologically opposed to medicine and to interventions, and that's almost their worldview, full stop. Which I don't know how to fix.
I think the silver lining with medicine is that there's way more of an objective element to it than those other kind of fields that we kind of discussed where people might have distrust. So I think that's probably a silver lining where, like, let's say, yeah, if you're in that scenario where you have cancer, you don't want someone telling you to like drink bone broth and ivermectin and like black seed oil just because the Quran said that black seed oil cures everything except death, which it actually does say. And
I didn't actually know that.
a friend of mine who I loved a bit, so I have a load of time for him, but he was saying that to me when I got COVID there like 2 years. I just had it last week as well, but I had it like 2 years ago, and I was like, bro, it's not what I need to hear right now. Like, but I think medicine has that element to it of, you would want to go to a doctor and you would want to have like chemotherapy, or you'd want to have whatever they suggest, rather than someone telling you to just have black seed oil for